if you'll excuse us.
But I have a very scratchy voice due to
Hello and welcome
tuberculosis.
to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and today I'm with Anthony Marquetta, as always, and J. Manfred Weichsel, author of Jungle Jitters. Is it End of Eden? I think it's
No, it's Not Far from Eden.
Not Far from Eden. Thank you. And several short stories to Kursova and Planetary Anthology. How are you two doing today?
Doing great.
Glad to hear
I'm
it.
having a lovely day. How about you guys?
I am eternally struggling with the malaise of our modern world, of our modern living. But I am certain that the Lord will come back soon. Please, we're begging at this point. I hope everyone in the chat is also having a great day. And we have Fiona Wolf and Bradford Walker. She is two-timing us with Brian Niemeyer's Final Fantasy stream. Wow. What a woman. Two-timing us. Anyway, I have prevaricated enough and made inside jokes enough. Why don't you introduce us in your own words, sir?
Well, my name is J. Manfred Weichsel. I guess you can all call me John because I don't go by J or Manfred in my real life. I've published 4 stories in Kursova, and I've got a 5th one coming up this fall. I had stories in the Planetary Earth Anthology and the Planetary Pluto Anthology, and I published a bunch of books, including Jungle Jitters, which I think is what we're going to talk about tonight. My most recent one is Not Far from Eden, which retells a story. It's an apocryphal story. It's in the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees about angels who rebel against heaven to have sex with human women, and they create giants called Nephilim. It's a pretty wild book, and I think it's one of my best. So right now I'm working on one called the Caledonian Boar Hunt, which is based on an old Greek myth called the Caledonian Boar Hunt. And that myth is about the king of Caledon. He fails to give offering to the goddess Artemis, and as revenge, she sends a giant boar to terrorize the kingdom. It kills people, ruins wheat fields, and all that. So this story takes place immediately following the voyage of the Argonauts. So the king, he sends his son to get the Argonauts back. They come, and some other heroes come from all over Greece, and they form a hunting party, and they go off and they hunt the boar. Now, Artemis, she doesn't want them to be able to, she wants to extend her punishment. So she sends the huntress Atalanta, who worships Artemis. She sends her to join the hunting party because she knows that the presence of a woman will create strife among the hunters and extend the punishment.
Awesome.
That sounds fascinating.
Oh, thank you. I didn't make it up. It's like 1,500-year old story, but
well, yes,
I've been researching it a lot. Going into
good candidate.
All the different sources and all the different authors who wrote about the story and all the different references to it and other Greek mythologies and the backstories to all the characters. And I'm really trying to take this story that's really just a couple paragraphs and turn it into a full-length book.
Yeah, we'll get on to Jungle Jitters proper in a second, but I'm also working on a story based on a Greek myth, on the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. And same thing, the actual original myth of Orpheus and Eurydice is not very long.
Yeah.
I want to say the most famous version of it, I'm blanking on the
Probably
name
Ovid.
of the author who's
Ovid.
Famous.
Ovid.
Ovid, thank you. Yeah. The Ovid version of Orpheus. Yeah, I said he's extremely famous, right? It's extremely famous, and I've read, of course, the Metamorphosis version of the story, which is the most famous version of the story. It's really not that long, and there's very little characterization, so when you're adapting Greek myths, it's interesting trying to meet that. So I'm trying to think of the word. Try and meet that balance of stays true to the myth while being its own thing. But that's a discussion for another time, which we probably will have.
I mean, just to
Assuming that you don't blow up the stream and kill
yeah,
us all,
no, I mean,
we'll
just
be
to
happy
jump
to
off
talk to you
that.
about Caledonian board when it comes out.
Just to jump off that, like the story of Watchers in the book of Enoch is only a couple pages. It's really, really short. And, I took like the little tiny scenes in there and I extended each one into like, a chapter or a scene in the book to come up with
Hmm.
that. But the thing about Ovid is Ovid wasn't actually Greek, he was Roman. He was
Yeah,
appropriating the Greek myths. It was cultural appropriation back in like what 300 AD. Um, or whenever it was written.
yeah. I mean, I think the Metamorphosis is an entertaining book. That's off topic. Let's go to Jungle Jitters.
Okay.
So
All
the
right. So
first thing I want to bring up with Jungle Jitters is number one, you describe the plot, what it's about, and number two, and what I'm curious about, because I feel like this is something that we need to address quickly. How does it fit into, you think, in your opinion, with the mission of our group? We're Superversive Livestream,
mm,
right? We are the
yeah.
Superversives. That's how we refer to ourselves. That is the point of view that we're promoting. We are
It's,
separate, or more like orthogonal to, like, the pulp revolution.
mhm,
There are people in our group who interact with people in the pulp revolution, and we write pulp. But first and foremost, what we're trying to push is superversive fiction. So how do
absolutely.
you think Jungle Jitters, is in, fits inside that mold, and
Mhm.
what is it about as well?
Okay. Well, I guess the overall arcing plot of Jungle Jitters is it retells the real life story of a Soviet mad scientist who wanted to create a human chimpanzee hybrid. Um, And I guess, you could look at that on the surface and you could say, whoa, that sounds like a pretty subversive idea. That's probably not, what's appropriate for subversive press. But, how it's subversive is, creating a human ape hybrid is something that's evil. And in the book, it's presented as something that's evil. It's presented as a bad thing that he wants to create a human ape hybrid. It's calling evil thing an evil thing, a spade, or whatever. Um, if it were like subversive, for it to be subversive, either creating a human ape hybrid would have to be presented as like a good thing, like some kind of laudable goal, or there would have to be some kind of moral relevancy involved where they say, well, maybe the apes are oppressed and it's the evil humans that are oppressing them, and the ape men, they just want to be accepted as normal people, and the humans are the bad guys, and boo bad humans. That would be subversive, but that's not what the book is about. The book is about evil, and evil does win at the end of the book. But I've read the old superversive blog posts. I've read all the old superversive writings. And they say that evil can win at the end, so long as it's shown as evil winning at the end. And, there's some subversive ideas in Jungle Jitters, about scientific institutions and about the Soviet Union and the whole structure of the cult in the jungle, Earth Sky. But even the old subversive writings that I've read say, there can be something subversive in the book. There can, the book can subvert, this thing or that thing, but the overall arc of the book should be subversive. And, I think it is, even though it presents evil and even though evil wins at the end, I think the arc is subversive because the evil is clearly shown as being something that's evil.
Excellent
Yeah,
answer.
that's what I was thinking and one of the reasons, I was interested in inviting shows that it's an interesting perspective on Superversive. So one of the things that I did, or that I wrote for when I was writing for the Castalia House blog, because I
Mhm.
used to write. So you know Castalia House,
Yes,
correct?
yeah,
Because
I've
I
had
I'm sure
a couple books reviewed on there. They reviewed my first collection. It was called "Going Native and Other Stories," and they've reviewed a couple books of mine. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I used to do the Superversive. I mean, technically, I still do if I really want to, but I've fallen away from it. I used to write for the Superversive column for the Castalia House blog, right?
Yeah.
And one of the articles that I wrote that was somewhat controversial-ish. I say controversial. It's more like people challenged it is a better way of putting
Hmm.
it, because controversial makes it sound like I was taking a bold stand, which is not true.
Yeah.
But I wrote an article where I argued that Breaking Bad was fundamental show, and I argued it
Fundamental
on
what type
similar
of show?
grounds to what you're arguing. Superversive.
Mm.
Wow.
That Breaking Bad was a superversive show, and I argued it essentially on the grounds that you're arguing, in favor of Jungle Jitters. That moral bad takes place in a moral world where good and
Mhm.
evil do exist and are recognized as such. Uh, No, I don't think in Breaking Bad, like Walter is excused for things that he does. I don't think it's making the case that nothing that anybody does matters, or that the world or that good and evil matter. I think it's just about evil people, but it's about evil people who are evil.
Mhm.
They're doing evil things. You're not supposed to think the things they're doing are good. It is a fundamentally moral show.
Huh.
And that's where it differs from Game of Thrones, which is in at least in the early seasons, an admittedly excellent show,
Mhm.
very well written with a tightly plotted, but it is subversive. It is not superversive because it does not take place in a moral world.
Mhm.
They're horrible people, but the message of the show is, very broad. Pull back the telescope, see it from a distance on a very broad scale. The ultimate message of the show is that good, evil, right, wrong, none of it matters.
Yeah.
No matter who's in power, whoever controls whoever wins the Game of Thrones, it doesn't matter. People are still going to be stuck under their heel, and,
Yeah.
and that's so. Jungle Jitters is not that, and that's a I think
I,
Jungle Jitters. Talk,
You need to
how
repeat
about this?
yourself,
Talk
Anthony.
about Jitters.
I did not
What was that?
understand that last part. I did not understand a word you said in that last
Sure,
quote there. Sorry.
no problem. So I think that Jungle Jitters fits in that tradition of superversive, and I think there's a place for that in
Yeah.
the superversive umbrella. So
Um,
what I want to say is you have a very unflinching view of evil. So of Jungle Jitters. So why don't you talk to us like the decisions you were making to portray everything in such a very stark way? Can you tell us about your thought process behind of some of the more graphic and the darker scenes in the story?
well,
Because I'm curious how you're saying you think this is a moral story, and I agree with you. So I want to hear your thought process.
I don't think it benefits anybody to kind of skimp when you're showing evil. I don't think that that's a good thing, actually. Um, if like you're gonna apologize, or I don't know how to say it. Like if you're gonna water it down, I don't think watering down evil, benefits society, humanity at all. I think acknowledging it does. And so I wanted to, show those, very graphic scenes as graphically as I could. I didn't want to flinch. I didn't want to, close the door, or move the POV someplace else. Like, I wanted it to be like right on those scenes. I wanted them to be direct and powerful, and I wanted them to disgust people. Because I think that evil should disgust people. So I wrote them in just as graphic and disgusting a manner as I could. And a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people, get mad when they see that. They think it's offensive to describe things that way. But, I don't think it's offensive. I think it's offensive almost not to, almost to say like, oh, this isn't like, that bad. That's what's offensive. Just watering it down and showing it as like, not in its true horror.
Yeah, I agree. when you read the story, and I'm being coy about discussing the scenes for two reasons. One of it is that spoilers in the story, and I do think people should read it.
Yeah,
And another reason I'm being coy in describing the scenes is because they're R-rated scenes, and
yeah,
this is a family show, guys. But being coy about the scenes that we're talking about, you understand, people who are listening, that the plot of the story involves mad scientists trying to create human monkey hybrids, so it's connected to that idea. Uh, I agree with you with what you're saying about it. Like, there's, I guess my response would be, if someone goes, it's offensive, then your answer should be, good. It's supposed to offend you. What is happening on here is offensive. It's horrifying. You should be horrified.
yeah.
If you're not horrified, that's the problem.
Yeah, I got a Amazon review of the book that actually pretty much says exactly what you said. That people like, if you're not horrified, you don't have humanity. Um, it's human to be horrified by horrible things.
Right. And, you know, tell me, there's another aspect of the book that I'm interested in, like, why it's there and how you came up with it and how you integrate it into the themes of the story. There's some trying the word, Hollywood satire in the first
Yeah.
half of the book. So, do you have like any experience dealing with Hollywood? Did that a place of familiarity, or was that all research?
Actually, I lived in LA for 10 years, and the satire about Hollywood in Jungle Jitters, and also in another book of mine called "She Was Asking for It." Both of those satires are just my experiences. That is like, I'm writing from personal experience. Those are things that I've seen. Um, I didn't make up a single thing except when they go into the jungle, all the stuff with the ape man. Like,
That's
nothing,
amusing.
nothing else is like, if you think like Hollywood's bad, if you've got any like, you know, ideas or thoughts about like what Hollywood is like, it'll shock you. It's worse. And I really wanted to show how vacant it is and how self-absorbed and just how delusional people are. Like, for example, there's the whole thing. When I was in Hollywood, I made money working as a background extra. Those people standing in the background in movies and TV shows. And I met so many people who were background extras who they would read the trades. And when they saw the movie that they were in, like, was a big hit, they would cheer, get excited because they thought that they made the movie a hit. They thought they were secret movie stars and that they're posting on like social media or whatever that they were background extras in this Hollywood movie as if they made it a success.
Wow.
So when I,
That's
wrote,
very funny.
so when I introduced those characters and I introduced them, pretty much doing that same thing, posting on Facebook and tweeting about the movies they were background in, thinking that is like that the movie's success is just solely based on their presence in the background. That wasn't even satire. It was just something that I saw that I thought was funny, and I put it in the book. So the Greeks, they have this concept about satire. I forget what it's called. It's a Greek word, but it means looking at things from the mountaintop. A lot of Greek satire, it's written from this POV that's not like first person or third person, but it's from like a guy on like really high up, like maybe a god or somebody like, like on the moon or in the heavens, looking down at earth and seeing all the people moving around. And that's basically what satire should be. You should be able to look at things from above. But with the Hollywood stuff that I write, I'm not doing that. That's just personal experience that I think is funny. What's that?
That is something. So, I don't know if you ever seen the movie La La Land?
Gosh, I don't remember. I don't think so. Who's in it?
It was I think it was Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone, if I'm not mistaken.
No,
It was a musical.
no, I haven't seen it.
That's fine. So the movie was about Hollywood in some ways. She, like, the main character is a waitress, who wants to be an actress because that's everyone, and
Mhm.
and it's a love story where she falls in love with a musician who wants to open a jazz club and whatever. But I came to the movie feeling like something was off about it.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't put my finger on why, because in many ways it was like a throwback classic musical, the sort of thing that I should enjoy. I like musicals, those throw stuff,
Mhm.
so with it. Nothing really, right? But I eventually figured it out. There was something that felt very artificial about it, and I said, "You want to know what it is? It's that Emma Stone. They are portraying it like she's having such a hard time getting roles and getting jobs, and not a
Mhm.
single producer asked Emma Stone to sleep with them. And like that's not realistic to Hollywood. Like this is a whitewashed version of Hollywood. This
Yeah.
isn't Hollywood. This is candy coated Hollywood, and they're portraying it like she's having such a tough time. But in reality, in real life, she would be have been asked to violate her values at some point,
Mhm.
and that's not even presented as a problem. Like at any point in the film, there was something that was fundamentally unreal about the portrayal. If that
Yeah.
makes sense to you.
No, totally. And that of course, that theme is dealt with in Jungle Jitters. It's also dealt with probably more graphically in She Was Asking for It. But that's definitely part of Hollywood. It's people who they just like normal people wouldn't do that, like, but they've lost touch with reality and t- lost touch with themselves and their relation to like the rest of the world, and they just don't understand how things work, and they think they can do whatever they want and get away with whatever they want because they can, because they get away with it over and over and over again, and so
Yeah, it's
they
one
lost.
thing that was pointed out to me with the whole Me Too era.
Mhm.
To anybody who's not in Hollywood, the Me Too era just seems totally ridiculous. It does not reflect our reality at all,
Mhm.
right? Like nobody I've talked to has ever dealt with the issues that people who are doing this campaign claim are so commonplace, right? Like that's just not how it works. But then somebody points something out to me and I never forgot it and it made me rethink this. They go, "Here's the thing though. In Hollywood, everything they're saying is completely true
It is.
in
Um,
Hollywood."
It is. It is. Like when you move there, like it doesn't matter who you are. Like if some people say, like, watch out for this person, watch out for that person. Whatever. If you're a guy, you're told to watch out for like these powerful gay people. If you're a woman, you're told to watch out for these powerful guys, and they're just there in positions of power. They can do whatever they want. Like they can just like drug people over and over and over again, and there's nobody to stop them at all. It's just that they have complete power, and it's probably not like that anymore. I'm speaking from experience from the last decade. It's
Mhm.
probably, maybe it is like that still. I don't know what it's like now. I've lost all my connections there. I don't have any anymore, and so I'm speaking about the past. But
Yeah, I understand. Like it's just one of these things though that that really did make me feel first a lot more bad for, I felt a lot more empathy for the actresses when I thought of it that way.
mhm,
And it also just made me go, "Oh, so no wonder that they go on like these crusades that seem insane to us because Hollywood is an insane world and what is real to them is not real to us." You
yeah,
know, but they don't know, they can't know that. It's a fish being surrounded by water, right?
yeah. Yeah, and it's also like they don't understand how things work. Like, for example, I was once working background, and I was supposed to like go out to the cash register, and I was supposed to buy something. So the director says, okay, you walk up to the cash register, you give the person the money, and then you behind the cash register, or how did he do it? Like, you go up to the cash register, you give the guy the product and then you give him the money or something, or it was something weird. I was like, that's just not the way that this works. Like, people don't like go back and forth and get something. It was just really weird. I'm not thinking about it, but you just see it like in TV shows. Like, I was once on a show, and I was looking at the police cars. It was in Washington, set in Washington D.C., and I realized all the police cars, they all said Capitol Police, like capital letter with an A. But I'm like, wait, no, it's Capitol Police. It's not
Uh,
Yeah,
That's
but like nobody noticed because nobody knows these things. Like Hollywood is a whole industry of just C students, and C students or D students even, or and they go there and they try to recreate reality, and but the reality they create isn't based on it's just based on delusion. It's crazy. And when you're there, you kind of get caught up in that delusion too, and you think that that's the way the world is, and you can't imagine that the outside world is any different from what Hollywood is like. And maybe it's like that anywhere, wherever you go, but I think it's like especially like that in Hollywood, just because it's so insulated and just so inside of itself that it just doesn't look outward very much. And so that's basically what I was trying to capture. You know, like the Hollywood section are these three ingenues who think that they're going to act in a jungle adventure show, but really they're being trafficked to the Congo for a very sinister purpose. And so but they don't know. They think that the way that everything that's happening and the way it's progressing is the way that things are supposed to be. And so I was trying to capture like the comedic tension between the reader knows the way things are supposed to be, and the reader can see miles ahead of these women, and wonders why can't the women see that they're being sent into this horrible situation. And then later when Zachary Walker tells his story, and he tells like a very similar story to the one that they went through, you see oh, there in Hollywood this is normal. To me it looks totally bizarre, but they're just behaving the way that they
right.
should.
Yeah, the other thing that I was thinking of, with all this sadness that and
With,
nature, women who are being taken advantage of by these powerful men, your three ingenues are not portrayed particularly positively in Jungle Jitters.
oh, I
They're a
think,
part of the system.
yeah, they're
That's that's
they're
fine.
comic. What's that?
That's fine. That's like, there's a lot of like home and ha, but in the end, you know, they enforce the system among themselves.
I mean, they're comedic characters,
They
and
are, yeah.
like they should know better, and they don't, and they do enforce the system. In the scene when they're looking for a producer, for example, that's them perpetuating the same thing that
Right, because if you read the scene in story with these three characters, none of them seem to see any issue at all with what they're doing. And, uh, to clarify for listeners seeking close to not the story, and because it's, kind of an R-rated subject, they are essentially trying to sleep their way into a role, right? Like, figure to sleep their way into a role. So, and as they're doing this, they seem to not even realize that this is not a thing that is normal. In fact, because it is normal in their industry, this is
yeah,
just what you do.
yeah,
So
exactly.
they are perpetuating it in the sense that they're okay with this arrangement because they're young and attractive and they're willing to do it. It gives them an advantage.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's portrayed very comically. I really,
It
do you know
is.
Rabelais, Gargantua and Pantagruel. He was this French satirist from the 15th century or the 16th century.
Yeah, I'm vaguely familiar. I'm not familiar with him because I saw some compare him to you and I Googled it. Uh,
Yeah. Well,
so that's my familiarity with Rabelais.
I'm
like
afraid
if
I
you
am
want,
entirely unfamiliar.
if you want where in Western thought, where extremely raunchy, dirty humor comes from, I mean, it comes from classical work, but really it's filtered through Rabelais and his book Gargantua and Pantagruel, which is, about these giants, but it's full of, very scatological humor and very bawdy humor and very sexual humor. And he's a lot more, I guess you would say, jocular than I am. My work, I don't think is jocular at all, but like, if like Rabelais were
I
like,
think your work is very, very funny.
thank you, thanks. But I mean, like jock like, like if Rabelais were writing today, his like heroes would be like two like giant like jocks in college who just like do anything you would think like a jock who was giant who could get away with it would do. And it's a funny book, but that's kind of where that strain of just very raunchy humor it comes to my work from. It comes from the Renaissance.
And I think too that Jungle Jitter is a very funny book, and it's a very horrifying book at both times. But
Thank you.
I think that those two things are together.
Yeah.
Like, I think those two are actually very very natural bedfellows, if that makes sense. Because it's like when you see the void, there are really only three possible reactions to it.
Hmm.
You are horrified, you go mad, you go mad, or you laugh, because that's the only other option that's open to you. When this and this is You see this all the time when people are uncomfortable with their emotions and they don't know how to express what they're feeling, they laugh.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you're portraying here. What the girls are doing is, on a moral level, quite horrifying if you think about it for too long. The
Hmm.
culture that they're perpetuating, but you laugh because it's so incongruent with how normal people think and how, a regular human person would deal with these situations, that's kind of the only option available to you. And horror is just one step further, I guess, on that line.
Horror and comedy are interesting because they're the only two genres where the goal of that genre is to get like a certain reaction from the reader or viewer or whatever. Horror wants to scare them. Comedy wants to make them laugh. But you're right in that it's both really the same thing. Like you see something horrible, you're either horrified or it's so horrible that you have to laugh. And you have like this gallows humor or this kind of like dark sense of humor. Those are two ways of reacting to that. So I want those two things to complement each other in my work. I want there to be the horror and the laughter, and I want those two to kind of play off each other to kind of make the reader maybe reach like a crescendo, like an emotional crescendo that just kind of those two things just kind of crash together like waves.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. It's one of the reasons that I think that you're so here's the thing about the sort of horror and the very R-rated scenes that you're showing in story. It was a decision that I made when I was writing Pinkerton's Ghosts, that
Mhm.
I didn't want to go on that level. Like, an example that I gave is that there is a scene in one of my stories, and I consider this story, personally, in my opinion, I don't know if Ben agrees or not, or other readers would agree, but I consider this my scariest story.
Mhm.
And I was writing a story about a girl who was being sacrificed in the story.
Wow.
And it's being told by the villain. So all of these things are together for this to be a really horrifying scene. And he kills her.
Mhm.
And it occurred to me, and I mentioned this as I was writing it. I said, "You want to know something? That if I really wanted to make this realistic to how these sorts of people would act in this situation, this girl would have been raped first."
Mhm.
Now, and when I told this to like Ben, I told the other writers who I was talking to about the story at the time, they agreed with me. But I said, I'm not going to write that. I can't do it. Like,
Mhm.
I can't put myself into that headspace. But I am glad that that sort of, a sort of writer like you exists who is willing to go there, because we need to know that horror is out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
You know,
thank you. Thank you. I agree. I'm glad I exist too. Can't argue there.
it's just a matter of like that's a level that I am not willing to go.
Well,
Personally, in my head, it would have been way too difficult for me to write.
yeah. No, I
But
get it. Well, part of it is like, personally, like my life is at such rock bottom that I just don't care. So, I'll just say it. I say what I want to say. Like, I've
ooh, that's a sad,
got,
sad, sad, sad.
I'm just kidding.
Uh,
I'm joking. But you know, I think like it's important, you know, now today, like to practice freedom of speech. You know, because you have so many people who want to take it away. And you know, I think the reason I'm able to write the way I do is because, like, in a way, like I understand like how censorship works. Like when like you see like on Twitter or Facebook or somebody gets canceled for writing something, and you see that, and it makes people say like, wow, I'm scared, I don't want to go there, I'm not going to go there with my writing because I don't want to get canceled. But that's where the actual censorship comes in. Like the censorship is
Yeah.
people getting canceled.
Oh,
That's
you're absolutely right.
a scapegoat or a sacrificial lamb. It's to scare everybody else into compliance, because they only cancel like 2 3 people a year, and it scares like thousands of writers out of saying what they want to say and writing what they want to write. And so at some point I made a conscious decision where I said, I'm just not going to pay attention to this. I'm not going to let it scare me, and I'm just going to write when I want to write. And you know, they can do what they want. I don't care. Yeah.
Yeah, I get the point, and I think there's something to this idea that I need to show this horror. Flannery O'Connor was very big on this. For that reason, in fact,
Mhm.
one of my favorite writers. She always said that. I recall Nancy Wright mentioning to me he had a mild disagree with me about Flannery O'Connor, where I said that she wrote for the nihilists, and he goes, "I don't think nihilists would listen to her work, but that's the thing." I'm going, Flannery O'Connor's the one who said that she wrote for the nihilists, and uh, the reason that she wrote for the nihilists because she claimed she wrote horror. Her work is often classified as gothic horror. If
Mhm.
you, I don't know if you're familiar with her at
You
all.
know,
First off, are
I've
you?
heard of her. I know who she is. I know a little bit of her life story, but I haven't read Flannery O'Connor. I know she's like
Okay,
they
so
live in the South and all that, but I'm not.
yes.
Yeah.
So her work is often classified as Gothic horror. She was a Catholic writer who was writing in like the Protestant Deep South, which
Mhm.
made her, really odd at the time, and still kind of reads oddly today. So she writes about Protestant Christianity from a Catholic perspective, which is really interesting, I think. But anyway, she claimed she was writing for the nihilists, and she would write extremely, extremely dark stories.
Mhm.
Her most famous story is called A Good Man is Hard to Find, and I agree, it is her best story. In fact, I consider it one of the greatest short stories ever written.
Well,
And the story is literally about a family is driving. They hear a news report that a serial killer is on the loose. Their car is, I forget exactly what happens, but they get into an accident. The serial killer finds them and then just executes them one by one while the grandmother begs for her life. And that is the plot.
mhm.
And I think that the story is actually really funny. And I think that the story is actually also really profound,
Wow.
but it is dark. It is really, really dark. That's the point. You have to get that dark. You're looking to reach people who can't be reached otherwise. You're reaching people who have fallen to the bottom, who are at the bottom of the chasm, and you're saying, look up. You're at the bottom of the cliff. She always said that nihilists can't write nihilism nearly as well as moral people, but just like a man who is looking around at the bottom of a cliff doesn't realize how far he is from the top.
Wow. Okay.
So when you're describing Jungle Jitters, I see it in sort of the same mode in a sense, if that makes any sense, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
You're writing for people who might not have the moral right, like they might not have that moral sense of a normal person. They might be morally deadened because we're living in this modern world where
Sure.
morals are topsy turvy, and morality is relative, and good is evil and evil is good, up down left right, it's all reversed. And then you're saying, let's make it, we're going to not look away. These are the types of people that you're supporting,
Yeah.
right? Like, this is where it leads. Look at it. You can't look away.
It's interesting that you kind of put it like that about like who I'm writing for and who's reading my books. I the way I think of it, and you're not supposed to think about it this way, but the way I think about it is I'm writing for everybody. Like I don't think there's like a demographic or a or a
Well, yeah,
group
but that's part of
that's
because
not
we all live
reading.
in that
Yeah,
society where
yeah,
morality is so, you know.
yeah. But I've got readers from all over the place, and from my whatever, and they're all reading my book from different perspectives, and so I think I have something to say to, like, the world. I'm not just writing for one group or demographic. Writing for the whole world. I sold
Yeah.
2 books in Hong Kong this afternoon.
Oh, that's very cool.
You know, Hong Kong. I've never been there. I don't know anybody in Hong Kong, but sold 2 books in Hong Kong.
I mean, I will admit, so I'll make the confession that I will admit that if I'm recommending, your work to people, I always preface it by saying like it's not for everyone, but
Sure.
and
I
then I have you on here going, no, actually, I kind of write it for everyone. I'm like,
Yeah, well,
well,
I'm like the most, maybe I'm the most mainstream author writing today. Who knows? Maybe I'm really good. Um, but like it's true. Like I've got readers on the far left, readers on the far right, readers every little step in between, and every little like offshoot that you can think of. I had a story, a short story called Money Honey. And, on the same day, I had, one reader DM me. He said, as an avowed communist, I'm so happy that you wrote a pro-communist book. And another reader who DM'd me, as an anti-communist, I'm so happy that you wrote an anti-communist book. And, I was like, wow, like 2 different people can read this book and come up with 2 different points of view about it. That's amazing. But I ended up unpublishing that because I wasn't really happy with it. But that happens. Like I get read by, like, people all over the political spectrum, all over everything.
yeah, it's actually now I did not think so. To be clear, I did not have this in mind when I, when it opened the discussion and was thinking about it. But now that I'm thinking of you and comparing you to Flannery O'Connor, do reckon I haven't had for the time to check out her short stories. You do,
Definitely will.
because now I'm actually starting to see that there are more parallels. Maybe I had considered originally.
Mhm.
Uh, because you definitely like Flannery O'Connor sort of got away with being like the only semi-religious writer and the only you know, realist writer, I guess to say, who's like still taught in schools.
Mhm.
Because genre fiction can never be taught in schools, right? It's
Yeah.
genre fiction.
Yeah.
That's why the Lord of the Rings is never allowed on an AP English exam. I know this because when I was in AP English and I asked if I could write about the Silmarillion and was told no.
Well.
Uh, because it's genre fiction. Genre fiction is inferior to literary fiction. Well, Flannery O'Connor sort of wrote genre fiction and sort of didn't, but she managed to make her way past the school censors, even though she really did not like the establishment at all.
Mhm.
Uh, which is kind of funny because like there are quotes from her where she would go, critics completely misunderstand my work, and I find it funny, kind of
Uh-huh.
like she like I think she had a thing. The grandmother who I mentioned in The Good Man Is Hard to Find, who is the main character of that story, she said that critics would always talk about highbrow. She's like professor types from colleges, which the grandmother is such a horrible character, and all of the readers and all of the fans would write and go would make a noise and clamor and go, "What? She's not a horrible person," because she goes, she's just like a regular grandma, and she would go, people call it like my fiction gross, and they go, and these are people who know nothing of real life, since it's just about real life,
Sure. Yeah.
which is kind of what you were saying, right? The Hollywood sections of the story are absurd and ridiculous, and you're like, yeah, well, everything that I wrote there actually happened. Yeah,
Yeah.
like all real.
Yeah. They're just, it's just like an out of touch place. Yeah.
And it was something, as I think of the stuff that you're writing too, it was something that John C. Wright once pointed out. I
Mhm.
recall, and I don't have the article in front of me, but I recall him saying, like, literary fiction is such a ridiculous comment. He goes, my fiction, he goes, I draw on the legends of King Arthur. I draw on, all of these different sources and things. I draw on the book of Genesis. I draw on, right, like all of this stuff. And my fiction is called genre fiction and is sneered at. And, Joe Schmo's new book about, the daily life of an artist in as he has an affair with his wife is referred to as literary fiction despite having no connection at all with the canon of literature. So, like, your books
Mhm.
are genre fiction. But, what was your last book? Like, one of your books is Not Far from Eden, and it's connected to the Apocrypha and the book of Genesis and the Bible.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. The book of Enoch, the book of Jubilees, and the book of Genesis were all source materials of mine. And all of my writing, most of my writing is based on some kind of source material. Like, you know, Jungle Jitters, the mad scientist who wants to create the human ape hybrid, he was a real guy named Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov. He was a real Soviet Union mad scientist who was really sent to Paris and then Africa in order to conduct these experiments, paid for by, the Soviet Union. That's true. And the guy he meets in France, Lysenko, I mean, not Lysenko. He's later, but the guy in France who performs those unmentionable operations on men's genitalia, that was a real guy who really performed those operations on the wealthiest men of Paris and really became wealthy by doing it. He was featured in all the newspapers, the New York Times, everybody, they all thought he was great. And, Lysenko in the Soviet Union, who causes millions of people to die just because of like an obviously false belief. That's a real guy too. Those parts of that book were researched, and I put a lot of research into Ibu Gogo and into a lot of my books, and I do think that and they're called genre, but other people who might write something in a similar vein where it's based on like historical reality or actual myths, it's called literary fiction, and I think the distinction is just something that people do to sell books. One isn't better than the
I
other, but
think yes and no.
It's more for street
Yeah.
cred, I think.
Mm,
The way they
Yeah,
talk, the
I
way they
agree with that.
interact, it's a respect thing. Like the reason why Voxday and John Scalzi have a beef such as it is isn't because Voxday blows John Scalzi out of the water as an author. He does, and it's not because John Scalzi had the $1 million book deal he never delivered on. Kind of. It's
mm,
really because they disrespected each other, and John Scalzi was dumb enough to accuse Vox of lying about his site numbers.
mm,
Uh, and then Vox got obsessed with it, and then every year he publishes his site numbers versus Scalzi's site numbers.
mm,
Um, like, it's not about some sort of like. This is more for the people out there than for you too. It's not so much about like authors don't become authors because I'm gonna make $1 million with my next great Harry Potter ripoff. They might think that, but in reality, those projects rarely get past the notes or plot or idea in the head
mm.
stage. In reality, you're doing it because you want a little bit of fame, a little bit of glory, and if you make some bucks along the way, if you're smart about it, hey, that's all the better.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I don't know. I try to
Yeah,
stay
it's
away
interesting.
from all the the drama and all the Twitter stuff. Like it makes it hard to focus on writing, which for me
Yep.
is the most important thing. So, when I'm hardcore into writing a book, I turn off my phone, I turn off my social media, and I leave it off. off. And the book I'm working on right now, the Caledonian Boar Hunt, I'm about at that point. I'm at that point where I got to shut off my social media, stop looking at it, and just focus on this book, or else it's not going to happen. Or if it does happen, I'll be distracted while I'm writing it and it won't be as good. So,
But
I'm just trying to avoid all of that drama and all of that stuff. And, it just has nothing to do with me.
it's true.
I just want to focus on, my writing and writing my books and getting them out there in the best way that I possibly can.
But John,
It is
the
interesting
Russians
when you
have
look at the history.
but the Russians have
Go
filled
ahead, man.
in one more square inch of red on the Ukrainian map, and
Mm.
you have to know about it personally. Otherwise, it doesn't
So
count.
please
Uh,
be turning off the news for the next couple of weeks.
Me too. I think.
Yeah, well, that's one thing that I've seen people have argued, I've seen people say, and I agree with this point of view, what's going on in Ukraine does not matter to me. And I've heard people go, some people who I even, are nominally on quote unquote our side, if you want to phrase it that way. Why would you say that? Of course it matters. These are real people, these are Christians. And go, well, yes, but no, you're missing what I'm saying. It doesn't matter to me because I can't do anything.
Hmm.
And it just does not affect me. Me worrying about it literally accomplishes nothing. It is counterproductive.
Yeah,
It's not a thing that I have an effect on. I'm not saying that it doesn't matter to the people who are there. I'm not saying that prayer isn't a good thing, but worrying about it, you know, congratulate your profile banner, the Ukrainian flag. I'm sure that that matters a lot to the widow, to the widow and her orphans in Kiev right now. Like, we just don't, worrying about this, it's not something that's going to help anyone. Saying,
yeah.
no, the US needs to be concerned. Why do I need to be concerned? My concern doesn't affect anything.
I was actually in Moscow in St. Petersburg one winter. I think it was 2003, 2004, and I saw some of the tension between Russia and Ukraine even back then. While I was there, Russia shut off the gas to Ukraine. And it was like really cold, like the coldest I've ever experienced. And like there was still a little bit of like free press back then, so there was pictures in the news of like Ukrainians freezing to death, and in the streets there's people like protesting. The government shutting off the gas, and there was also like counter protests that were obviously just paid for by the Russian government, like people like marching like single file, going like Moscow is the third Rome, Moscow Tretri Rim is what they said. So I got like a little bit of background on that, and I know a little bit more of like maybe the history of that than like a lot of people. But I have like a policy where I just don't comment on current events. Maybe I could provide a new perspective to it, but I just try to stay out of that because I don't want current events to be part of my brand at all.
Mm.
I don't think that that's productive to my brand as a writer, and I don't like it when I see other people do it. I don't like it when I see big Hollywood celebrities making current events part of their brand. And it's just annoying. Like, it's like I go on social media and it's like, I don't care about these people's opinions. Why are these people trying to sell books to me by spouting off their opinions about what's going on in current events?
Mm.
It does not make me interested in their space opera. So why are they doing it? I don't know. I think it's they want to be part of maybe an in group, and so they want to say like what their particular in group says, and so that they repeat it, and it just becomes an echo chamber. And then I think the books move into the background. And my books sell well. I'm not the best selling author in the world, but I'm probably near the top 20%, maybe. Maybe I don't know the numbers, but I think it's because when I present myself
Yeah.
publicly, I'm talking about my books. I'm not talking about other things. You know?
See, I don't think people really understand too, what the scales are in publishing.
Mhm.
I mentioned this to you before stream, so I'll tell the story now. Like, when you think of, making a living on books, those are like the top 1% are
Yeah.
able to actually make a living on it. If you're in the top 20%, like, I have my anthology out, God Robot, that I edited. It has 40 reviews on Amazon. And I
Uh,
was telling somebody this very
I'm jealous.
proudly, because that's a good number. And somebody burst out laughing, and they're like, and it's understandable why they would, because
Mhm.
if you just hear that in a vacuum, that doesn't sound like that many reviews.
No,
But
that's
when you
that's
compare
amazing.
40 reviews to how many reviews anthologies normally get on Amazon, that's probably in like the top 5%. Yeah. Like, that's an incredibly high performing anthology.
Yeah,
People
totally.
don't realize, because like they think of the writing field as like the J.K. Rowlings of the world and stuff like that, and even on a lesser level, like if you're a successful mainstream selling author, you've made it into the top 1%.
Mhm.
Like the Larry Correa is in like the top, probably 0.5%.
Sure.
Even John C. Wright even is probably within the top 10% of selling authors, and
Good.
he's not making enough to raise, to make a living solely out of writing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
But
one
that's
day,
just how the industry works.
I mean, one day I will. Like, this is my 2020 was my first year as a first full year as a self-published author. So this is I'm starting my third year. If I started back in 2011, 2012, if I'd been doing this for 10 or 11 years, I'd be making a lot more money now. And I wish I had started back then, but I wasn't really in the know. About that. I had these twisted dreams of Hollywood back then. But
Right. The other thing that's true is the great thing about the new pub industry is that formerly, if you had asked me, like when I was, say, 20 years old, so 8 years ago or so, uh, you all know roughly my age, so congratulations. But anyway, roughly like, 8 or so years ago, and I'm in my 20s in college, if you had asked me if somebody should try and make a career in writing, I would have told them absolutely no, no way, by no means. It's sort of the equivalent of trying to take a lottery ticket. But
Mhm.
but there is now a big caveat. If somebody were to ask me today if they should try and make a career as a writer, I would answer, you could do it if you put in the work.
Yeah.
That's the difference. And it's a big difference. It will take you a lot of work. It's certainly
Mhm.
not going to be easy, and the life is not for everyone. But unlike in the old club model, where you were essentially just gambling on a select number of lottery tickets, in the new
Mhm.
pub model, if you put out the work and you put in and you make the effort and you market and you do what you're supposed to do, it might take a little bit of time, a few years, but it absolutely can be done. You can make a career as a writer.
Absolutely. And the with the old pub, they put out a book and it's got like 4 weeks, 6 weeks to become a hit. And if it doesn't become a hit in that really short amount of time, then they pull it from the shelves, they pulp it, they destroy it, and it's gone. Um, but with the new pub, you have all the time that you need, and you can use that time. Like Five Maidens on the Pentagram. Um, that book, I released it September of 2020, like 2 months before the election, and no, nobody bought it because people were reading, the news about the election. And when you're reading the news, you don't have time to read books. You can't read two things at the same time. That's just fact. So and I was like, oh no, I published a book that's not a hit. It's failed. But then, the next year, 2021 came along, like March, April, May, people slowly started buying my book. And it became, one of my best selling books just, during those 3 months. And so, if it was old pub, that wouldn't have happened. It would have been done after like 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and you'd never hear of it today. And so, that's one advantage, and the other advantage you have is just you can do it as long as you want. Like, you need a lot of books to make money being an author. It's not about like selling one book. You need like to sell like a lot of books, and you need a lot of books out, and you need people buying.
Yes.
And as like a new pub author, we can publish and publish and publish and slowly build ourselves up. which the old pub authors, they don't necessarily have that advantage. Their one book has got to be a hit, and it's got to be a hit like immediately, or they're dead in the water. They're dead, and so
Yeah, the old pub model was a model of you right, Jaji Lamplighter Wright. So El Jaji Lamplighter, I should say.
Mhm,
Uh, that's her author name. So I know her as Jaji Wright. But El Jaji Lamplighter, the author, she talks about her story of getting involved in old pub, and it took her like I want to say 10, 12 years to break into
mhm.
the industry. And sure, her books ended up being a hit, but ended up being in that whole time she was not making a career as an author. She wasn't selling books, people weren't reading them. Now, she claims nowadays, and I certainly believe her, and she could speak for her, she's not regret the process. And I believe her because, she used that time to improve her craft and whatever. But
Mhm.
I would say that other people looking at that story should see it and go, she says she doesn't regret it. So just look at what she went through and say to yourself, does that the sort of process that you want to go through to sell your books to people? Because if not, you now have another option.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
It's like here's what being
okay,
like a
go
traditionally
ahead.
published author, would be like. And it's a lot like being like a screenplay writer too. But we're talking about books right now. So let's say like you got an agent and you want to write a book. So you write a little letter to the agent, like like just a little idea for the book, and the agent is like reads your like little paragraph and says, great, write an outline. So you sit down, you write an outline, and the agent looks at the outline, and she'll either say, no, this isn't good, or she'll give you some suggestions to update the outline, or she'll say like, go ahead, write this first 10,000 words of the story. So you go, you write the first 10,000 words of the story, you give them to the agent. The agent says, no, this isn't working, I can't sell it. Or the agent gives you notes to improve the first 10,000 words, or the agent tells you to write the next 10,000 words. And so you write the next 10,000 words, and this goes on and on and on until you've written 100,000 words, let's say. This whole process. And it's taking years because you have to write, send it to the agent, get notes, revise, write, send it to the agent, get notes, revise. And like, eventually, like at the end of this years long process, you have a book. And then the agent tries to sell the book. And maybe the agent can sell the book, maybe she can't. Maybe the book remains unsold after you've put years and years and years of work into it. And this process of selling the book, it's a few more years maybe. So yeah, you're gonna spend 5, 7, 10 years on one book writing that way. But me, I spend about 4 months on a book, maybe sometimes five. I want to bring that down to three, and I try really hard to bring that down to 3 months. But my books are so research intensive, and I put so much thought into them, and that I just can't bring it down to that 3 months. There's other people who are knocking out a book every month. I wish I could do that because I'd be making a whole lot more money. But the way I work on my stuff and the way I write just doesn't permit me to put them out that quickly. But that's what that's an advantage because the more books I have out, the more I'm going to be making. And I know that, so I want to get as many books out as I can. And I wouldn't be happy spending 5, 7, or 10 years just on one book that might not even make it to print.
Yeah, exactly. And going through, so Fiona Wolf has been commenting on our post. She had a few things to say. Kit Sunchi and Mr. Brian Niemeyer, she's referring to, showcase that newbies can make 1 to 2K, I think, a month if they put in the effort, and she is correct.
Mhm.
Uh,
Most of Brian
let's see.
Niemeyer's money comes from a combination of his Indiegogos and books and his many editing projects, which people can pay for.
Yeah, that's true too. Uh, she also says, and this is interesting, New Pub helps make Midlister a reality for a lot of people. She's right. So I don't know if you're familiar at all,
Yeah.
probably not
Yeah.
from what you've said here, with the video game industry.
Oh, no,
Uh, yeah,
nope.
what's been going on what she's describing actually in the video game industry. So I'm a fan of there is a critic who calls him Ben Croshaw, who calls
Mhm.
himself Yahtzee, and he wrote an article recently. He's a critic who's managed to make himself relevant in the industry despite being around for like over a decade now. And the reason that he's managed to keep himself relevant is, in my opinion, because he is critical of the industry, even though he works for a game journalism magazine. I remember when he started out as independent, and when he got the job for the magazine, I distinctly remember him saying that it was like a condition of employment that they would not ask him to censor himself.
Hmm.
So I really like Ben Croshaw
Yeah.
for that reason. Even though I don't always agree with him, I think that you'll get an honest opinion out of him, right? No matter what. And in this way, he's managed to keep himself relevant. And he wrote an interesting article on video games, which connects to what we're talking about, called "Have Video Games Peaked?" And he said, now that sounds kind of ridiculous, right? Like, as we advance technologically, but the mid list has been eliminated in
Mhm.
video games. They're either big AAA, which is the name for the big budget titles, the monster companies,
Mhm.
that come out with tentpole projects, right? And a lot of them follow the same basic design philosophy, and that design philosophy is sometimes disparagingly referred to as mudware, meaning they throw a lot of things into the game that don't fit together cohesively and do nothing outstandingly well, except
Mhm.
arguably graphics, because technically they're better than before, but the gameplay is no longer innovating or improving. Or on the flip side, you get indie creators, and indie creators have very low budgets, and sometimes they make creative and good games, but they don't have the technological capabilities of the AAA studios. So you're missing on that aspect of it.
Mhm.
Now, there has been a revolution in video games. Just like I was saying with writing, if you had asked me, say, a decade or so ago, would it be a good idea to try and make a career as a video game designer? I would have said, no way. That's a terrible idea. You can't do it. Uh, so But nowadays, I wouldn't necessarily say that because of mainly the platform, and this is like the Amazon of video games, the platform Steam.
Mhm.
Steam allowed indie creators to put their games directly up for sale on the site in the same way that Amazon opened things up for ebook authors.
Wow.
Now, the parallel is actually really fascinating because the downsides are largely the same. Steam isn't there for the creator. They exist to make money, right? They're not there to make things easier for you. They're there to facilitate the growth of the industry. They're there to make as much money as they could possibly make. So, but ultimately, the impact it had on the industry was like an explosion at the time.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, there were small time games that never ever would have seen the light of day at a big studio that were being made, getting critical acclaim, and exploding in popularity. Uh,
Mhm.
the big recently played, and we even did. It was a big enough deal that we actually dedicated an entire stream just to this. Was the video game Hades? And Hades was a little it's like an action roguelike game where you fight monsters in the through the underworld. Really pretty looking game, but not AAA type graphics, pretty
Mhm.
because of the art direction and pretty because of they made good use of the resources that they had. And it had great gameplay and an entertaining story. And it was made by an indie studio. And the indie studio was actually kind of well known at that point because they'd been making very high quality indie games for a while. But the key here is that a game like Hades, with its throwback mechanics and its very distinct art style, and its lower technical capabilities, could not have been made by the AAA studios. They would
Sure.
have said that it was not worth the money to spend on it. It didn't innovate enough technologically, and they would have ignored it. But now
Mhm.
Steam makes those sorts of games and those sorts of things possible. It's the creation, though, where writing has an advantage that video games don't, is that there's a technological gap in video games. No matter how good those indie creators get, they simply cannot have the resources of the big budget studios. It's
Sure.
impossible. Yeah, like they're that's the one thing that AAA will always have, and that they're milking and trying to bring to the bank in video games. Books, however, don't have that issue because a book is itself the industry. It's a book. You don't
Sure.
technologically innovate books. all of the innovations happen on the writing side, and frankly, most of them are bad. Innovations in writing generally don't work out.
Mhm.
Yep.
I'm not going to say always, because that's not entirely true. The novel is, in effect, an innovation. It's a relatively new art form.
Well,
And
like the it's like when people talk about Hemingway, I say, well, Hemingway did really good for Hemingway because Hemingway understood what was necessary for the stories that Hemingway. You know how I'm repeating Hemingway a whole bunch of times.
Mhm.
You know, like maybe there were two or three guys who could copy Hemingway, but quite frankly, they'd be copying him. It's like trying to copy the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas guy. Yeah, he has a certain amount of lyricism in his manic and honestly almost demonic prose that is entirely him. You know,
Yeah.
you cannot copy it. People who copy Oscar Wilde tend to be mean spirited snark factories. I don't care about that. I'm not going to read that. Oscar Wilde was actually kind of funny.
Yeah. Um, I think
he was.
those are all authors who have very unique voices.
Mm,
And, in my own work, when I started writing, that was something that I tried to cultivate in my work because I also like authors with very unique voices, like, Kurt Vonnegut, for example. Like, that's something that draws me to a writer is that they are writing very distinct work that you couldn't mistake it for anybody else. You couldn't copy it, you couldn't rip it off. People might try, but that they don't succeed, they fail. And so my first few books, when I was trying to discover my voice, I didn't think they were overall that successful, and I had published them. They're no longer on sale. The first one where I feel like I found my voice was Ibu Gogo, and that's the first one where I really feel like I hit it. Like I just like I figured out what I was trying to do, what I was trying to say, and what my voice was. And that's something that I don't think we talk about a
mm.
lot is like everybody's trying to make everything so generic right now. Did you see that article on Xavier Lastra's blog, that three-part series about the internet,
Uh,
about social media? He's one of the copy editors at Kursova. His blog is called Emperor Ponder's blog.
Oh,
um,
I actually know the blog. I haven't looked at it in a while, so take a look at it.
Yeah, it was like a while ago. He wrote like this three-part series about social media and how it makes everything the same, and how the internet makes everything the same. Because people, like, the example he uses is like, if you want to draw a barbarian, you Google barbarian, and then there's 5 pictures that come up, and you just pick one of those pictures and copy them. And since everybody does that, everybody's drawing the exact same barbarians, and they all start to look the same. When,
hmm
like, 100 years ago, all the barbarians look different because people are using different reference material. But in like like the indie scene, there's something that I really despise: this concept right to market, where these people think that the way you're supposed to write is you're supposed to pick a genre, read 40 books in that genre, and then just like write down all the different beats in those books, and then just write another book exactly like them, following the same beats and the same plot,
mm,
with different character names and maybe a different setting. And I don't like that. I think,
right.
like, we're indie writers, we have more freedom than writers have had since the Gutenberg Press first came out. Back in the early days of the Gutenberg Press, everything was self-published. Like those like classics you read in school, like Gulliver's Travels, Robinson Crusoe, Roxana, whatever. Like those were all self-published books, because there was no such thing as a publisher. There was just the printing press, and now we have that again. And we can write our own very unique works that are going to last because they have something to say, and because they're original and they don't look like anything else. But people are taking that freedom and using it to write like the most generic books that have ever been written in the history of humanity. It's like the publishers used to say, like in the 60s, like these writers, they just want to do whatever they want. Well, I tell you, if it was their money, if they were in control, they'd be writing the kind of things that we're telling them to write now, like very generic books.
hmm
And that's exactly what's happening now. People, the finances, they they are solely responsible for the financial success of their books. So what they're doing is they're writing like the most generic books that they can, knowing that those are going to sell. And that's not what I want for myself. That's not what I want for my career, and that's not how I want to make money. I want to make money, expressing my ideas, my views, and I want to be speaking my own voice, not somebody else's voice, and not some like collective voice that was developed through algorithms on the internet.
Right. Like it's very much like I've read plenty of indie stuff. I've gone out of my way for it, and I can automatically tell whether or not something is like copying, like say Nick Cole, right?
Yeah.
Or trying to copy Nick Cole, because after John C. Wright, he's the grandmaster of science fiction. So good luck with that. Uh, and they're trying to copy it, and it's like,
Yeah.
I don't care about any of this. It's not even as well written. It's not as compelling. It's like when people try to copy, so famously, John Scalzi copied Robert Heinlein, and that's how he was able to introduce himself to his agent.
Sure.
And I'm talking about Scalzi because he shows up, not because of anything I personally feel towards him.
Mhm.
It's he copied it. He was able to do it. But, from what little I've read of it, because, why should I eat a poor meal of a book?
Mhm.
It's just it's Heinlein, maybe like different weird sex stuff, because Heinlein was weird in his sex stuff, and
Mhm.
maybe a few different ideas, but it doesn't mean that it's unique or worth reading. It just means that it scratches an itch that only Heinlein could scratch. And that's a very different thing.
Yeah. When authors try to, write pastiches, I guess, used to be the word of other authors, it's never as good
Mm.
because, you know, that author who wrote the original work, is the one who put the time, like, thinking things through and imagining the world and the characters and putting it down on paper and, writing out the plot. And, a lot of thought goes into writing a novel. And if you're just going to, kind of regurgitate what somebody else wrote, a lot of the work is done for you, but a lot of it gets lost, I think, in the translation, because you're not creating something new anymore. You're just creating like a copy of something, and it doesn't have the same resolution as the original.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
So, what's that?
You're going down by yourself?
What was that?
I have no idea. That wasn't me.
Hmm.
Anthony, are you okay? Blink twice if you need rescuing. Anyway, let's what?
So sorry about that. Is not feeling well, and she tried to walk down the stairs, and there was a big bang. So my brother got worried and ran off. So if you heard a noise, that was that. She is fine.
Gotcha.
Uh,
So,
but yeah,
just to go over some comments real quick.
Sure.
Let's see here. People basically agree with us with this stuff.
with something less awkward.
Huh? Anyway, Amazon doesn't have good word search algorithms. It puts book in screwball categories. That's kind of the authors. People believe that if they have the bestseller icon, it'll produce more, but there's also a correlation to the quality of the book and how strong their email list is. Um, like if you get into Christian charismatic cookbooks, of which there are probably maybe 20 extant, and the last one was bought in 2013, yeah, sure, dude. You've certainly earned that bestseller tag. Um,
Mhm.
Sure, and it doesn't really distinguish, right? You just see it there. But it's like we've had David Halquist on our channel before several times. He's a friend of the show. He's written for
Mhm.
Pinkerton's Ghosts, and he's been in the top 50 of Amazon books
Wow.
with his novel. And part of that was Chris Kennedy really going to bat to promote him. because he did it through his imprint, but also because it's genuinely, high quality. It David Halquist didn't like top the top tens, for bestsellers, because guess what? You're going up against Ender's Game, you're going up against Star Wars stuff and all that jazz. You're just not going to beat that. They would never let you beat that. How about that? That's a
Mhm.
better way to say it. But at the same time, it's like if you looked at number of books, he was like number 47. Like
Wow.
going for that is better than just chasing random clout in any way you can.
Now I remember what I was going to bring up earlier, and I got distracted from. I thought it was really interesting that you brought Nick Cole as someone people copied, because in fact, Nick Cole, my favorite series by Nick Cole, that I absolutely consider like a masterpiece, brilliant series, is his Wasteland Trilogy,
Uh-huh.
which is a pastiche, essentially, of Hemingway.
Hmm.
It is written in the style of Hemingway, and it's written perfectly in the style of Hemingway. It is a dead ringer. I don't know if either of you have ever read that series. If not, it's absolutely a must read. I adore that series,
Wow.
the Wasteland Trilogy by Nick Cole.
Okay.
And it's so funny that you specifically brought up Hemingway as, oh, you can't replicate Hemingway when that's he
Well,
did
yeah,
it. He
but
did it,
like,
and he did it perfectly.
but also
But
like we've mentioned that Nick Cole is like the grandmaster of science fiction after John C. Wright.
Yes,
So
and
it's sorry.
so I don't know the book, but it's a post-apocalyptic like book, right? Like kind of like
yes,
the
it's a
rodent.
post-apocalyptic take on the Old Man in the Sea in the
Okay.
first in the series, and then it grows from there in the sequels.
So I think that isn't copying Hemingway then. I mean, I haven't read the book, but that sounds like he's taking two things and putting them together. And that's
Yeah,
actually
yes,
one means of like creativity is, taking two unrelated things where nobody's ever thought like how can these two things go together and figuring out how to put them together. Like a lot of creativity, a lot of writing is finding connections between things that other people haven't found. And people think that like creativity is like making something up new, but that's not necessarily the case. If you can figure out how to combine two things that have never been combined or make connections between ideas that nobody's ever made before, like that's what is creative. And that's when people look at, I think, when my work and they tell me that I'm creative, I think that that's probably what they're reacting to. Like my ability to like say like, oh yeah, Soviet mad scientist, jungle adventure, Hollywood, go.
yeah. If I were to call I would mean when I called your own work creative, and I tell people, there's really nothing like his stuff. I would say that it's
Mhm.
your ability to, or your willingness to not flinch away from the horror, to show all of these horrible things while discussing ideas that genuinely never would have even occurred to me to bring up. That combination of things, I think, makes you like a really unique writer in that sense, because you're telling
Thank
Caledonian
you.
Boar Hunt. It's a retelling of a Greek myth that is itself its own subgenre, right? Retellings of Greek
Yeah.
myths, and a good one. It's a subgenre. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that there's a problem with that. I think it's fine for that to be a subgenre,
Mhm.
but that alone isn't why I'm looking forward to your story. Because I'm sure if I Googled Caledonian Boar Hunt, I would find other people who did it. The reason I'm interested in your telling of the story
Mhm.
is because I know that you have a perspective on it that's going to be different than other people's.
Well, thank you.
Like you're not going to shy away from things that other people would shy away from. You're going to draw parallels and things and see things that other people don't see something in the story that other people don't.
Mhm.
The reason Orpheus and Eurydice is arguably the single most retold Greek myth, right? If you look
Sure.
up that history,
Yeah.
literally the first opera ever written was an adaptation of Orpheus and Eurydice, and there have been multiple Orpheus and Eurydice. There was a musical Hades Town.
Yeah.
There was a modernized retelling that was told like a teen fiction book. There are so many
I
retellings of
guess.
Orpheus and Eurydice. So of all of the Greek myths that I could pick, and even of all the
Mhm.
myths that why would I use a retelling of Orpheus and Eurydice? And the answer is that I am confident enough in myself in my own writing. But I think that the new I have to say about it is going to be something that will be worth reading to people.
Huh.
You got to have that confidence as a writer.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess just for the people at home who might not know who that is, Orpheus was a poet, and his wife or girl, went to Hades, and he went to Hades to get her back. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes, the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice can be told in one sentence. It's Orpheus gets married and his wife dies suddenly, tragically, and pointlessly.
Hmm.
The hows and whys don't really matter. I think the traditional version of the story is she's bitten by a snake.
Yeah.
Orpheus is the son of a muse, maybe. Uh,
Apollo,
that's
maybe.
in some versions, and yeah, he can play and he can sing and play the lyre so beautifully that even the rocks and stones are moved, and they are so moved by his song of lament after the death of Eurydice that they tell Orpheus if he goes down to how to get to the underworld, where he can plead his case to the king of the underworld, Hades, and his wife Persephone. Orpheus goes to the underworld. He pleads his case. He sings his song, and his song is so beautiful it moves even the black heart of the king of the dead, and
Hmm.
he agrees that Orpheus can bring Eurydice back up with him on the condition that Orpheus plays constantly on the way to the surface and that he does not look behind him
Hmm.
until they leave the underworld. The story ends with Orpheus increasingly feeling paranoia and doubt on his trip up that she's not really following, that he's been tricked. And
Hmm.
finally, at the very precipice of the world, Orpheus turns around and sees Eurydice, and she is dragged back into the underworld, never to be seen again.
Oh.
The continuation of the story to the death of Orpheus is that he sings a song of lament so depressing that the Menaids, like wood nymphs or something,
Hmm.
tear him limb from limb to get him to shut up.
Wow.
And which
As
I
so
always,
for all emos.
yes, I always thought that was a vaguely comical ending. Uh, so I heard the story, and now I'm off on my own tangent. But you brought up Orpheus and Eurydice, so I won't go into my own ideas since we've already talked about this on stream before. And anyway, there will be other opportunities to do it, I am sure, in the future. But it's this idea that like Orpheus and Eurydice is a story that's been told hundreds of times.
Hmm.
So I need to have that confidence in my own writing that I'm going to bring something new to the table. And I do have that confidence. I've been fascinated by the story of Orpheus and Eurydice for years in the same way that you mentioned you've been fascinated by the Caledonian boar hunt,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And much like with the Caledonian boar hunt, the original Orpheus and Eurydice story doesn't expand on Orpheus's backstory. It doesn't expand on Eurydice's backstory. It doesn't expand on any of that stuff. Where the time period is kept intentionally vague. It's just ancient, where he lived, how he lived, who Orpheus was as a person, who Eurydice was as a person. Uh, all of these things are things that can be expanded upon. And my perspective that I'm going to bring that's new to the table is a Christian perspective to the story,
Mhm.
which, to my knowledge, nobody's ever really brought to the table before. You know, C.S. Lewis did bring a Christian perspective to Greek mythology, but he did it with the myth of Cupid and Psyche in his masterpiece, Till We Have Faces. I don't know if you've ever read that book.
No, no, I haven't.
I recommend especially if you like C.S. Lewis at all.
Yeah.
I have no idea if you do, but
Right.
uh, if you like C.S. Lewis at all, Till We Have Faces is probably his book. I don't know if it's my personal favorite. My favorite book by his is The Great Divorce. I
Mhm.
think it's probably his best book. It's a masterpiece. It's a retelling of the myth of Cupid and Psyche, but
Wow.
Christianized, if that
So
makes sense. And that's
Yeah.
that's the
hold on.
perspective I'm bringing to Orpheus and Eurydice.
So we'll put a pin in this for now. So, John, when it comes to your
Good idea.
stories, how do you choose through it? Like, the Caledonian boar hunt isn't, shall we say, a famous story. It's well known. But like, what made you choose? How do you? Excuse me, tripping over my own tongue.
Sure.
How do you choose your stories, and how do you go about sort of like, I don't know about plotting them out, but sort of like setting them up for writing?
Well, with this one, it's kind of I saw the painting by Peter Paul Rubens at the Getty Center, over a decade ago. That's in Los Angeles, and I kind of immediately got the idea to write a story about this, a book about this story. For some reason. But I wasn't really a very good writer at the time, and I kind of scribbled about it, and I just kind of dropped off because I didn't have the skills necessary to
Hmm.
tell the story.
I'm looking it
But,
up currently,
but
so I can see.
then I kind of I've been writing a lot over the past 2 years. I've published 6 books since the pandemic. Taking full advantage of the opportunity that everything around me had kind of stopped, and to just focus on my writing because I wanted to get to be a good writer and I wanted to get a lot of books out, and I was thinking about what to write, and my last few books have been really dark. Like my last 3 books ended in like the apocalypse. Well, my last 2 books ended in the apocalypse. And I didn't want to write another really really dark book, but I'm not like in like a really bright happy mood either, so I don't want to write like a really bright and happy book either. And I was thinking about like what do I want to write and where do I want to spend the next 4 or 5 months of my life, because that's how long it's going to take me to write this book. And I thought, well, I know exactly where I want to spend like the next 4 months of my life. It's in the world of classical mythology. So, I started going through like, old myths, looking for, an idea. Because before, I'd wanted to write something like more contemporary, but I just was not in the mood to write a contemporary book. Just like the world around me just disgusts me so much. I just didn't want to spend my mental energy, in the real world. So, I started like looking at old Greek mythology, and I started reading like everything. Like I read Sophocles, I read some Ovid, I read like a little bit of everything. Even like some like Bullfinch and some Edith Hamilton, and finally I kind of remember,
Goldfinch, really
like I kind of
interesting.
remember what's that? I kind of
Goldfinch, that's
remember,
interesting.
yeah. Kind of remembered that like I'd had this idea a long, long time ago about the Caledonian boar hunt. So I kind of went back to the material and I started looking it over and reading it. And as I did, like I slowly said, like, yeah, I think this is where I want to spend like the next 4 months of my life is just in this world right now, just like exploring this world of classical mythology. So that's kind of what happened. I just kind of slowly became interested in it and just kind of slowly got sucked into it until that was the project that I was working on. Like it kind of pulled me in. Rather than me choosing it, it chose me.
Hmm.
And it's kind of the same with a lot of my books. Like with my last one, Not Far from Eden. I had written an earlier book about the same story, about the Watchers and about Eden, and it was terrible. I mean, I published it like in 2019, but I just wasn't really happy about it. But then, I went back to it to kind of fix it, and I realized that I could write a much better story using the same material if I just started over again from scratch. I knew the story very well already, and I was very like intimately aware of like all the little details, philosophical ideas in the story, and all of the different theology in the story and its implications. And in my earlier 2019 book, I didn't think it was thought through very well. I thought there was a lot of incomplete thoughts in there, and so I wanted to redo it and to kind of complete the thoughts and to make like a complete work that was really my own. So I sat down, I went back to the material, and I wrote a completely new book, based on this old story, and that became what Not Far from Eden is. So, like I do that a lot. Like I'll become interested in something, and then at some point, like the thing I'm interested in kind of takes me over and pulls me in. and I'm kind of being guided. Like the old story is almost like my muse, if you want to put it in like Greek terms, you know.
Mm, we do like our Greek terms here.
And even with
Yes.
Jungle Jitters, Jungle Jitters, the section Zachary Walker's story, where like he narrates a story to the three girls. That was based on previously published material of mine. That was based on a short story that I had in a magazine that only published one issue called Dimension Bucket Magazine, and that magazine's out of print. What's that?
I
Oh,
said
so
that's it. I said that's it. That makes sense to me. That's
yeah.
interesting.
So, I kind of went back to that story, and it was an older story of mine. It didn't really make a lot of sense or have a lot of context. And I started thinking, how did this cult come into being? Like, why is it there? Why are these people there? These things weren't explained in the original story. But, once I started looking at it again, thinking about it, like, I got the idea of bringing Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov into the story, and him starting, this compound. Because I'd been interested in that story for a very long time. It's a story I've read like a bunch of times, and trying to like write a book about that, but kind of failing and starting and failing and starting and failing. So I took that other material that I'd written about Ilya Ivanov, where I'd started and failed and started and failed and started and failed, and I combined it with the other material that I thought just wasn't a complete thought, and I put them together, and I made lines and connections between all of them, and I tried to think all the through lines through until I had something that was like complete. So like I think everything I've written almost is like based on like a false start from like years and years and years earlier, where I'm able to go back to it, and I've thought about it more, and I'm older and more mature, and just smarter and more well read, and I'm able to find it and pick it up and complete it. And like I'm still doing that. Like I'm still starting things and abandoning them and starting them and abandoning them. So I'm going to always have future material to do that. But everything is kind of based on like different parts of like my life and my thought process, and that then I kind of figure out how it all goes together.
Mm. That's pretty solid. I appreciate the strategy myself. It's similar to what I do.
Mhm.
Uh, so taking that, like, so you were inspired by the Caledonian Boar and by Jungle Jitters, all the things that you've, sorry, not inspired for Jungle Jitters, not that inspired yourself through time travel, because that would be a cheap and hackneyed plot device.
Mhm.
Um, so you're inspired by this, you take it and you sort of like,
Hey, I use time travel.
yeah, yeah, and I
Eh.
edit your stories too. Um, okay. That's the problem with having characters on a live stream. Like you bounce off. It's great. It's almost like we're well written and developed characters. So, hmm, that's pretty satisfying. Like not every author can really tell how they go about their business. A lot of them just say, "Well, I plotted out," and so on.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's all like there's just sometimes like I come across something that just really interests me, and I
Mm,
want to explore it, and I want to develop it, and I want to turn it into a book or a story. And I don't always know like why when I start, but by the time I finish, I pretty much know why I wrote the book.
mm,
And it's a process, and my ideas develop throughout the writing process. Like I'll write an outline, I'll write according to the outline, then I'll change the outline and rewrite it and write it in a different direction, and maybe I'll write a scene from like one character's point of view, and I'll realize it should be from another character's point of view, and so I'll rewrite the scene. And like in Jungle Jitters, there's the scene from the colonial governor's point of view. just one chapter. Poiret is his name, and he was actually the colonial governor during the time the story took place of that area. I had actually looked it up and researched it, but I couldn't find anything about him other than his name. So I kind of imagined like what kind of character he had, and like why he was a colonial governor, and like what his attitude towards the French colony was and the colonial system, and what he thought he was accomplishing with the natives. And I kind of, just from getting this name, like this is the name of the colonial governor, at this time, I kind of developed like an entire character based on him, and wrote that from his point of view.
Hmm.
So I was just, and I just looked at a list like who's the governor, who was governor at that time. That's the only
Right.
information you can find. There's nothing else.
Yeah.
That's all you
Years
need to
ago,
do.
I wrote an article on like, how you get your ideas, and I went through the reason that this question is so mocked by so many writers, I think, is because the answer is often like way more than people were expecting. That's why like Harlan Ellison would had the famous joke where he goes, "I buy him in bulk from Schenectady,"
No.
which I think comes from an old vaudeville joke. But when I wrote my article on how do you come up with your ideas, it was like two full articles that was like synthesizing all of these influences and various places into what I wanted to do is one book. It's like you get the germ of the idea, and then as you expand it, nothing is original, of course. And if it is original, it's almost certainly bad because people have tried it and it didn't work because you're not that smart that you've come up with something that's both original and new in the year of our Lord 2022.
Yeah.
That just isn't going to happen unless you're going to be a genius. And frankly, I have never met that genius. So, I wouldn't even know what it looked like. Even the greatest writers I know are not original in any sense of the word. So maybe okay, no, I'll scratch that. Gene Wolfe, who is now dead, but he was around not that long ago. He was original and he was a genius. So you're one. And if I mentioned this to his face, he would probably deny it. So there's that. But it's interesting because, where did you get the ideas for XYZ? And you go, well, I came up with the concept after I watched the show, and I thought I could do it better, which is how I've come up with multiple ideas. I read a book or watched a show, thought that the idea had a ton of potential, and was super disappointed when it didn't. For example, one of the main villains of Pinkerton's Ghost, Blood Money, is a vampire who can control people's minds, and I came up with the idea after I watched a Marvel show, Jessica Jones, which has a mind controlling villain played brilliantly by David Tennant in the show. And he is by far the best part of a very mediocre show. And I was incredibly disappointed with how badly he was misused in the show. So I see better, and I came up with this idea for Blood Money, and now, the plot of the novel that I have, that some of this character has almost nothing to do with Jessica Jones. Personality, except for that very, very, very vague premise of the villain control people's minds. And then there are elements of the show of the anime Death Note. There's elements of Daredevil. Frank Miller's Daredevil. There's of course Pinkerton's Ghosts and everything that we've already put into that universe going into. There's elements even of Harry Potter films and everything like, well, Harry Potter's not that great. Not that great. Is that really what you want to use as an influence? That's kind of the point. I'm taking elements that I like, even from things that otherwise aren't that good, and I'm trying to say, I think it would really work here. In this case, like one of the characters from the Fantastic Beasts movie, I really liked this character, and I thought that he could work the particular type of setting that I was coming up with. All sorts of things like that. Originality never was a part of lines, word for word. From other stuff, but put into a completely new context, it becomes a loving homage instead of. But that's really what it is, right? Like that's what writers do. That's what you have to do. You can't come up with it on your own. You simply can't. That's not how it works.
It's like, I mean, I wonder like what people mean when they say original, or what their expectations are. Because, if you write a vampire story, it's automatically not original because there have been vampire stories before. So, what it like a new kind of like creature? Does everything single creature need to be new now? Can we never write like the same creature over again because we need to be original? But I think it goes back to what I was saying before, like, originality comes from making connections between things that people haven't seen before, or
Yeah,
combining two new things, or two things that
this is
exist.
what made Gene Wolfe such a genius.
Mhm.
So Gene Wolfe has his Wizard Knight series, and he connects. John C. Wright has said this about Gene Wolfe before. Wizard Knight connects mythology and Christianity together, and doing so, he goes, "I've never." He's like, "I would if you had told me that you were going to do that, I would advise you to drop the idea because it was impossible." And Gene Wolfe did it.
I have not read
Yeah.
Gene Wolfe, but I do have a Gene Wolfe book sitting in my TBR pile. The Fifth Head of Cerberus. Should I? Is that it? Should I
So
read? Should I read that next, or
here's
what?
the funny thing. I am not a huge Gene Wolfe fan. I'm somebody who recognizes that he is a genius,
Hmm.
and I've tried to read multiple things. I finished one book by Wolfe, so I've read enough to say I have read Gene Wolfe, and that was the book The Sorcerer's House.
Hmm.
If you want a good quote unquote introductory Wolfe, since he's a very dense read, The
Yeah.
Sorcerer's House is as good a pick as any. Fifth Head of Cerberus is generally considered a very good introductory Wolfe, but it's a short story collection.
Oh,
So just keep that in mind when you read it.
sure.
They're connected short stories, but they do stand on their own.
Yeah, I think I'll check it out. I've been in the mood for some science fiction. I've been reading a lot of Greek mythology lately, so I kind of would like a break.
Wolf is very dense, which is one of the things that
Yeah,
you either love that or you dislike that about him. I've never considered
I mean,
myself a huge Gene Wolfe fan, but I've also can recognize, as a writer, yeah, Gene Wolfe is a genius.
I was an English major at a Jesuit university, so I've read some pretty dense books. Density
My
doesn't scare
condolences.
me. What's up?
My condolences.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah. Well,
That's
it was cheap.
mm,
That's one. That's a good way to think of it.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't lose money.
Yeah. I don't know. I got a good education out of it. I really don't have any complaints. I'm pretty educated.
It, I appreciate that. It's just a running. It's kind of a running joke
Yeah, I
on our
know.
show that we look at Jesuits side eye
Well,
with a bit
it's
of a side eye.
Voltaire. Voltaire. So did Voltaire. He has that whole gag in Candide where they get kidnapped by the cannibals, and the cannibals are like, "What are they?" And the other one's like, "Ooh, they look like Jesuits." And then they're all like, "Let's eat the Jesuits." So, Voltaire.
It's a running joke that, of course, is not entirely a joke, but
Yeah,
it's
no,
another
I get you.
story.
Yeah, I know. When you knew that saying it, I didn't care.
But yeah, Wolf's interesting. Like I said, if I were to recommend an introductory Wolf, Sorcerer's House was the one that I finished. Uh, I'm a big believer. I don't know if you are, but I would assume from your views on this show, I'm a big believer in objective quality being a thing. There are things you
Mhm.
can make a comment that something is objectively good or objectively not good. So, looking at Wolf from an objective versus a subjective lens, I am not a particularly big Gene Wolfe fan. That is my subjective opinion. Objectively, Gene Wolfe is a master, and if his style doesn't grate on you as it sometimes does with me,
Mhm.
then you will probably find him to be absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I think I'll check it out. I definitely will.
well. I want to thank you. If you have any final words for us, give them to us.
Well,
Uh,
If you haven't read one of my books, think about checking them out. Everything's on sale at Smashwords right now. Everything's either 99 cents or $1.49 there. So, you can hop over there, you can buy the book, you can download the Mobi and sideload it to your Kindle. Or you could go on Amazon.com and buy them, but you'll be paying a little more money. But it's whatever is best for you. But please, if you haven't, check out some of my books. They're pretty good.
I've just tossed some links in the chat, and I absolutely agree. You've certainly been around a bit, and your body of work speaks for itself.
Thank you.
Anthony, you have any final word for us?
I said earlier that if I were to recommend his works to people, I would say that his work is not for everyone because it's very R rated. However, if you're looking for something that is fearless in what it shows and is unflinching and unflinchingly looks at the horrors while also maintaining a lot of very funny humor, then Jungle Jitters and J. Manfred Weichsel's work might be for you. And I certainly don't regret my time with it.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Well, folks, thank you for joining us. Do look forward to our projects in the future. After my bouts with illness and malaise, I have bounced back and will soon be at my full strength. And we'll have many projects for you to enjoy once again. Do check out Pinkerton's Ghosts. Do check out the links in the comments, the description, and the chat. And I wish you all a lovely week. Next week we'll have somebody random on. I guess I'm going to kidnap somebody off the street consensually, and we're going to ask his opinion about things until we get bored of him. We will.
Generally. So, Joe, do you have anything you'd like to say? This is not a joke. I'm being held against my will. Joe's such a kidder.
This guy, 10 out of 10. Great comment, and you hear us screech and throw him out of the van and drive off. Join us next week. All right, have a good one,
Ever
guys.
see the Muppet movie? They have that joke with Jack Black. Anyway.
Oh, that was a fantastic joke, though. All right.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. Have a good night.